Hello, everyone. This is Spencer Snowling from Hatch, and I'm glad that you could join us today for the monthly GPSX webinar. Today, I decided to go through a number of features which you may be aware of, but maybe some of them will be new to you. Features that we've added to the software over the years to sort of help you make your day go better, to be able to get through your modeling exercises faster and to sort of be more efficient at doing the work that you do with GPSX. And since we've been putting in so many of these over the years, I thought it would be good to review the ones that we use on a regular basis and make you aware of all of those valuable things along the way. So, as per usual, I'm going to go through my slideshow. I've got lots of desktop demonstrations today. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat, and I'll stick around at the end of the webinar to answer those as usual. Okay, so the plan for today is just after a quick introduction, I've broken down all of these items into three sections here. One about model building, so when you're putting your model together on the drawing board in modeling mode. Then over in simulation mode about useful features for running simulations. And then lastly, for managing the output from the models. There's a lot of information that gets generated when you run a simulation. And so we have lots of different ways to be able to collect it and process it and handle it as it goes along. So as I mentioned, we'll have lots of desktop demonstrations and I can answer any questions that you have at the end. So GPSX is a tool, as you may know, that has been developed more or less continuously since it was first created in 1991. So that was sort of the beginning of Hydromantis at that time, and GPSX was one of the original products that we made back then. Just for those who may not have seen the older versions of GPSX, this is what it looked like when in its early days. This is, I believe, version 2.1. This is what it looked like when I was using it in graduate school in the early 90s. I joined Hydromantis in 1999. And it kind of looked like this a little bit still at that point. It's more or less the same product. You've got objects that represent the different unit processes in the plant, and you put them on the drawing board and right-click on menus. But of course, today it looks like this. This is what we are sort of used to dealing with on a regular basis. So we've put in a lot of effort over the years to, modernize and keep up with modern software protocols. And as such, we've got lots of really interesting tools that we've generated along the way. So that's a lot of years, 33 plus years now developing this platform. We've put in a lot of small features here and there and refined those over the years. So we also use the software ourselves to do consulting projects too. So we use the software in the same way that the clients do. And so therefore we find lots of places like, oh, wouldn't it be really nice to be able to cut and paste this thing or to be able to transfer this information into this menu and so on. So we have added a lot of these very small, convenient features over time to make our lives easier and to make your lives easier as well, since you're going to be running into the same kinds of things. And on top of that, many of the model useful features that you will see in the platform, particularly a lot of the buttons and menus, have come from user suggestions. So if in the process of developing your models and doing your projects with them and delivering your results, you run across a situation, it would be really great if there was a button right here that did this thing. Just please send me an email. By all means, I would love to hear about it, and that we've gotten some of the really best features that we have in our software as ideas that came from our users. Okay, so I'm going to tackle the first of the three different sections here on the model building. Now, before I get started, I should say that this is going to be a bit of an unusual webinar in the sense that this is going to be getting into the weeds a little bit here and there about some of the more obscure parts of GPSX, and it is going to be a fairly hodgepodge kind of like jumping from topic to topic sort of thing. So just to give you a heads up that I'm going to just sort of jump right in and jump all over the place as I come to show you the things that I think will be useful for you. So first of all, in the preferences menu, we have a number of settings here that are there to help you customize the look and feel and behavior of the GPSX interface. And sometimes these features might be really useful to you, particularly if you're sort of new to the software. And other times you're like, okay, yes, I don't need that anymore. I would like to turn that off. Many of those features are available to you here in this preferences menu. So I'm going to start by talking about the behavior of the drawing board and these settings here in the middle of this menu. One of the issues that you can see here is that we can turn on and off these process connection arrows. So these are these little tiny arrows that kind of are connected to the place where you can put in a connection that's a stream coming from another object upstream or downstream. And they're not very big or particularly noticeable. However, they are very handy if you're not quite clear on where it is that I should be connecting the stream to. So you can see in some cases over here, that there's places like it's not really sure where the actual connection point is along there. And this is particularly relevant for, as you may know, output menus. When I right-click in simulation mode, right-click on a connection point, and then I get a menu, and sometimes I get a menu that is very specific to that particular connection point. And so therefore I want to make sure that I'm selecting it properly, or otherwise the menus that come up will be for not what I was looking for. So you can see here that you might not know where exactly the sort of the line ends and the object begins. The same thing down here, but now you can see that, always click right on the arrows themselves, right? So that's a little smoother look over here if you're going to use these images to put in a report, but functionally while you're using it, you can have these connection points on. Whenever we do a GPSX training with people who are brand new to the platform, I always ask them to turn this on so that everybody can kind of see where they're connecting everything to. Another feature, very similar, is the grid. Basically, the GPSX drawing board is made up of these blocks, and you can put one object in each block, and it's generally kind of centered in that block. You may have noticed as you were trying to move things around, if you didn't have the grid on, you wouldn't be able to sort of see how things end up being lined up the way that they are. So I know a number of users who have this on all the time, and they like it because now they can understand and see where things go, and that's a very useful thing. One other thing that I forgot to mention to put on this slide too is that when you're in this mode, you can still see where the objects are going to land, but the connections themselves, the stream points, they're still pretty flexible. You can actually just go and grab one of these and move it around just by using your cursor to grab the pipe, so to speak, and pick it up and put it down. So there's still quite a bit of flexibility in the way that you put together your layout. Right. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to jump over here and sort of just quickly discuss some of those features. And so you can see here, if I go to the View Preferences menu, here's where those settings are that I mentioned before, showing the drawing board grid. I can turn that on or off and show these process connection arrows. I'm going to leave those on for now. There's many other things in here. You can set your default working directory, like if you've installed GPSX and it made a choice for you and like, no, I don't want to work in that directory, and every time you start GPSX, you got to like browse away somewhere. You can actually set your working directory here. Another key thing is setting your default units. Maybe you want to work in the US units, millions of gallons per day and so on. You can do that here as well. So let's go back to that same menu here. This is a nice way that you can turn on the grid right here like this, turn that on and off. And also you can go to these labels. Now I can, right now I'm showing all of the stream connection labels and all of the labels of the objects, like where it says hauled waste here. So I can turn one or the other of those off that I like. This is actually the same as this button right here, labels. I can turn those back on again, etc. So I tend to leave them on for my own work most of the time, except for sometimes when I want to take a nice clean image to put into a report or something, I might drop out the stream labels just for the sake of being able to see where everything connects to clearly. Right. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a couple other features while we're here. One of them that's very useful is the find function. So just like you were in a Word document or something, you can hit Control F and it comes up with this menu. So I just did that. I believe you can also get to it from here. There's find right there. And it does two different functions. Now, one of them is fairly obvious. This one, select the label to highlight the process. So basically you want to find a particular label of a connection point, right? You can do that just by clicking in this little drop-down menu, and it shows you where it is on the drawing board. Now, this layout's relatively simple and pretty straightforward, and actually this list of labels is pretty descriptive. But when you get into a larger layout where you might have 20 or 30 or 40 objects on the drawing board and you're zoomed back out a little bit, it might not be nicely easy to see something, and you're like, oh yeah, what was that label that I had before? I've got a report that tells me that the ammonia at this particular label is some value. What can I do? So here, where's NA1? Well, it jumps right to it and lets you know. Okay, simple feature. It's there for you to be able to just find things quickly. Works in simulation mode as well. Now, the other one is the one that I find more useful, which is find a parameter on the menus. So as you know, in GPSX, we've got all of these menus. There's dozens and dozens and dozens of them everywhere. So basically, what we want to do is, like, I know that there's a particular parameter, but I can't remember which object or menu it is that I'm after here. So, do I have a particular settling parameter that I'll be able to find? So you can type in a phrase here. I'm gonna search for alpha, the aeration alpha. So value, and if I hit find, it opens up this little thing here, and it's listing all of the instances of the word alpha on the input and output menus. So here's the one that I was looking for, alpha factor. It's basically, that sort of calibration parameter for the aeration system. All right, that's the one that I want. And this button right here is very valuable. You just click on it, and it opens that menu and goes directly to alpha factor. It is a very handy way to just very quickly get to a particular parameter that you're looking for. And again, it's especially good when you got like lots of objects on your drawing board and you can't remember exactly which of the menus that it is you're looking for. You can actually jump right to it. Okay, another couple of things that are kind of handy here as well. If I right click on an object, I have this thing down here, summary of changes. That is basically a list of all the parameters that have been changed from the GPSX default. So if I do that, I get this list. And it's basically saying that in the clarifier, there's, the set point's been changed, and this tuning here for the controller's been changed, et cetera, et cetera. And again, I can use this button to go directly to that point on the menu. I can, in fact, jump between objects even here. So let's go to the aeration one. We can see in here that the airflow has been set and so on. This is a really nice, handy way to be able to understand what did we leave at the default and what few, hopefully handful of small changes that you've made. What are those, and how can I get to those menus easily? And while we're on the topic of talking about those input parameters, I thought one other thing that I do on a regular basis is for any menu that you're going to open up, you may know that I need to often find the cryptic variable name for something. That means by cryptic, we're saying the actual variable that appears in the code, because if you are writing your own custom code or you're building a process controller where we ask you for the cryptic variable name of the variable that you're trying to control, those things you can find here by putting your cursor over there, and it pops up in a little window here. You can see total airflow into aeration tank / and then that long variable name there, right? There's a super fast way to get at that, and that is to just right click on this set of words here and copy cryptic name to clipboard. And I'll show you a perfect example of where that is useful. Is if I wanted to build a mixed liquor controller, I have to provide in the controller menu the variable name of the thing that I'm trying to control, which in this case is going to be the mixed liquor that is leaving the aeration basin here. So if I go there and I find the output variable and I find concentrations, this is the mixed liquor concentration that I want to control. And I can copy that cryptic variable name here. And let's, for argument's sake, we're going to use this pump connection point here. I realize that's not common. This one's already been set up for an SRT controller, but here, this one's not been set up. So we're going to use this controller. Some people mix waste from their mixed liquor tank. Not all that common. And I'm going to go down here to that pump control menu. We're going to turn on the controller. And then there's a whole bunch you have to set up here for this PID control loop, including the set point and whatnot. One of those is specify the control variable. So now, instead of having to remember what it was or write it down somewhere, I can just paste that value in directly. So that is a very handy way to be able to do those things. and get access to those cryptic variable names, and you make sure that you don't actually put a typo in there. Now, I'm not going to actually cancel out of those changes because I want to leave the layout as it was before. Right. Okay. So I'm going to go back to my slides here briefly, and I want to talk about another feature that we have when you're drawing out your layout, and it's called sourcing. Sourcing means that you are linking multiple objects on the drawing board together so that they can share a common set of kinetic and or settling parameters. So if you're linking these bioreactors together, it's the kinetic parameters, the growth rates and the half saturation coefficients and hydrolysis rates and stuff. That's the kind of stuff that is going to be shared one set across all of these. It's useful in cases where you might need to change a parameter, such as, say, the AOB growth rate. And if I'm going to change it in this plant, well, I would have to do it 3 times because I need to change it in 3 different menus. However, it can be handy to link them all together, and then that way you only need to change it in one place, and those changes get passed to these other 2. So the ones that have the little chain link on it here, it means this has been linked to another place. And the one that is no links on it, this is what we would call the parent, and these are the children. So a child will inherit the settings from the parent. So the way you do that, you right-click on the object, go down to Source Data, and if there's no link there, you'll see a list of all of the things that you could potentially link to. If you have a link there, then it gives you the opportunity to, if you prefer, to remove that link. So it's pretty straightforward. It used to be a little bit more complicated on setting up a sourcing in the old versions of GPSX. Recently, we've switched it to this nice little right-click menu here, and it works nicely. You can also do it for settlers. If you have 2 sets of settlers, you can get them to share one common set of settling parameters. Right, so once you've done that, if I right-click on this child here that's inherited its parameters from somewhere else, you can see that the parameter menus have now been, taken out here. They're grayed out. We don't allow you to access these because these won't be used. We're going to use them from the other place. Okay, so let me get back to my demonstration here. Now, what I want to do is move on to talking about running simulations now. So this is now, we've built our layout, we've got it running, and we've entered in all the information that we have. It's been compiled and running in simulation mode. And we are now going to look at some of the handy features that you can use that controls how you interact with your model. So these are features related to driving the simulation and so on, and getting certain types of graphs and things built. So I'm going to go back to this preferences menu now and point out the fact that there's actually another set of parameter things that you might be able to want to look at. If you go to the next tab, I was previously showing you the first tab. Now this tab here, input output, this is a lot of ones that are related to running the simulation. So some default settings up here for various activities, and this thing here, which is when you drag an input parameter onto the panel and it creates a slider, you can actually get it to, by default, do different things there. So you're probably used to it always making a slider and to set some minimum and maximum bounds, but you can actually have a bit of control here about what you want it to do. And the same thing down below for the graph type. You can control what types of graphs automatically get generated when you do that as well. So for the input controllers, and here's a couple examples of those down here. Right now, when you drag a parameter up there, it's going to make a slider by default, but you could choose to have it to be the up-down controller or file input or other things. And what it'll do is it'll automatically set these bounds for you here. You can get it to be 0 to 1,000 or any other number that you like. But sometimes that's not very helpful because the parameters themselves are, across a number of different orders of magnitude. So what we did was we made it now so it's between 0 and 5 times the number that the value of the parameter itself. So here what we did was when you drag it, it's going to go from 0 to 5 times 2,000. So this is why this is 10,000. So you can make your sliders have wider ranges or lower ranges. But now again, this is by default. This is just when you drop it down the first time. You always subsequently have the opportunity to go in and modify those things anyway. So that's just to let you know that if you think our default ranges are too big or too small, you can come and change them. Right. Okay. So, and then I want to spend a little bit of time and several slides here talking about our scenario function. Now, scenarios, we've actually done an entire webinar on this in the past. Scenarios is something where you are creating a collection of inputs and you group all of those inputs together under a single name. Those can include things like the parameter changes in the menus. It can be data files that you are associating with your simulation such that it's reading data from a file. And then you give it a name, and then you can create as many scenarios as you like and easily switch between them by using this scenario menu at the bottom of the screen. So some of our introductory tutorials, if you're doing GPSX tutorials for the first time, you will get a chance to use the scenarios. I'll be honest, though, it's kind of one of those things where it isn't until you do your first project or until you're starting to run a lot of simulations where you realize the real value of doing this. If we did not have this, it would actually be really quite tedious because you would end up having to go to a number of different menus every time you wanted to switch to a new scenario. You'd have to go and make all of those changes. You'd have to probably go back to modeling mode and then rebuild it again and so on. And, you might even be faced with the concept of having to have multiple versions of your model, multiple GPSX layouts. And so what we wanted to do is get rid of all of that confusion. That requires a lot of thinking and a lot of management of your information, such that I'm going to build one base model, and then I'm going to create a number of scenarios based off of the base. So you can do that here and flip between them very nicely. So once you've created one, you can go in there and you can easily flip between the scenarios. You can see what is the content in any given scenario. You can manage that. You can have it interact with what's going on your sliders and other things too. So just so that you are aware, if you haven't used them before, in the same way that the GPSX, excuse me, the same way that the GPSX default comes up here, and you can see all of the defaults are in black. If you make a change when you're building your layout, so in the drawing board, you can see immediately that that's different than the default. We make it blue. Now, if on top of that, you go and change other parameters in a scenario, then they will be green. And this is very handy to tell and be able to sort out what inputs did I change that were part of my base model and which are the temporary changes I'm making just in this particular scenario. So that's the way we use those to tell them apart from each other. Now, it is absolutely the best way to manage all the inputs to your model. And you can manage those by going to the scenario show menu, like I'll show you here in a moment. Somebody here made a scenario called winter setup. And so it's got a cold temperature, it's got a different influent characterization and a different flow. And all of these things there are there and will be automatically set every time you come into this scenario. And you can actually build a scenario off of another scenario. When you're building a new one, you get to select which one do you want to start with. And so all of that can be done in the menu, and you can manage which data files, like the ones where you're going to read in dynamic data. You can do that from this scenario configuration and data files menu. And I'll show you that here shortly. You can just add or subtract or edit the files that you have here. Right. Okay, so now I'm going to switch to a different layout. Let me pop over here to my demo number 2 layout. Okay, so this is a pretty straightforward model. I wanted to just demonstrate this conventional activated sledge. And when you go into simulation mode, here's the scenario menu down at the bottom here. And if I click on it and we go into the scenario, so I can select one, I have 2 to pick from in this particular example. The base model, so that's the same as what appears in the menus when you are using the drawing board. And then I made a steady state example, which I'm going to come back to later in this demonstration. But in the meantime, I want to create a new scenario and show you how that works. So if I create new, and then I'm going to create it off of one of these. I'm going to create it off of the base model. So I'm going to call it a calibration. Now that's really quite a common thing to do, is to create a temporary scenario while you're calibrating your model. And then once you're happy with that, you can then build those settings in as your new base model. But a calibration is a good excuse to sort of build a scenario and sort of accumulate those changes that you want to make there. Okay, so now I'm in the calibration scenario. You can see that down here in the lower left corner. It tells you which scenario that you are in. So if I were to go to one of the menus here, and if I go to, say, the settling menu, for example, I make a change to this clarification parameter, which, by the way, I've actually got on a slider up here. I'll show you how these things interact with each other. And I want to change this to, it says between 0 and 1. Let's make this a 0.75. And if I enter that, here you can see immediately that this is now green. That means it is part of this specific scenario. If I change back to the base, it will go back to the original value. So let's accept that. And you can see now it actually moved the slider over for me here. And in fact, if I go back to the base scenario, go back to the base model, it moves that back over to the base value. And then let's go back to the calibration again. And we can see that that's over here now. So that's really handy. You can start to make the changes, you can run simulations, and then you can build up your scenario from a number of changes that you made in your menus. And you can actually transfer the values of these things up here even more efficiently. So it's actually more common probably when you're making a model and going through the process of doing a calibration. It's more usual that you would probably put your most common calibration parameters up here and sliders, just because it's nice and easy to use. You don't have to keep opening a menu or anything. So you've got these values that you want to play with. So let's, for example, say that we made some adjustments to these. Let's change this a little bit again. We'll change the influent characterization, and we'll change alpha to a higher value. And I'm going to run my simulation. Okay, so now let's pretend this is the setup that we want, and that we've calibrated our model, and this is now our new calibration. Now, this is an example, like I mentioned in one of those earlier slides, where a user came to us and said, can you make a button that just transfer these directly into the scenario? I'm like, absolutely, we can do that. So that's this button right here, transfer controls to scenario. So rather than opening up all of these individual menus for each one of these parameters, we just hit this button, and then we identify which ones that we want to do. So I'm going to do actually these first 4 because those are the ones I changed. And then I hit accept. And so if I go back and look at the content of this particular scenario, we can see those changes. They've been transferred from here to here, and you can do that, and it's all nice and handy. And if I go back to my base model, you'll see all these return back to their original positions. So nice and handy to be able to put everything together in a nice way. Right, okay, let's go back to that calibration scenario, and we can see those changes that are all there. Now, I will mention this other button right next to it actually goes one step further, which is it does not, it transfers them to the base model. It basically transfers them to your actual layout as if you had made those changes when you were over in modeling mode working on the drawing board. So in this case, it becomes part of the model. And this button is if you went back to modeling mode, made those changes, recompiled the model, came back again. So this one is going to actually take several steps. You'll notice it confirms which things you're transferring, it transfers them, then it confirms that you want to recompile the model, and so on. So also extremely handy way to do it. All right. Okay, so, and then lastly, I'll mention briefly here, I wanted to point out that since I created this off the base model, now the base model itself has a data file associated with it. So when we're running a dynamic simulation, you'll see that these values are changing over time. We're actually reading in a spreadsheet full of values in this particular example. And so when I went into the base model, I can see that those values are being used. When I created the calibration scenario from the base model, it actually knew that I wanted to copy all of those data files as well. So here, if I go to this data files menu, if I click on the base model, you can see here it's got this one spreadsheet associated with it. If I look at the same thing for the calibration one, it copied, that spreadsheet full of data came with it into the scenario. So that is also extremely handy. All right. So I'm going to go back now. That's a sort of all I have to say about scenarios. It's an extremely useful feature. And if you have any questions, please let me know. So now I want to get on to the last of the three sections, which is talking about managing all of the output that comes out of your model. So as we mentioned earlier, there is a lot of information that is generated by running these mechanistic models. There's, hundreds and thousands of parameters of outputs of concentrations of all the state variables and all of the things that we calculate. And so you can produce a lot of graphs and so on. So it's sometimes handy to be able to have these tools to help you refine down the information, just get the stuff that you're looking for. And again, there are many settings in the the preferences menu that is helpful to you to be able to set that up and sort of manage, what information that you want to see. So a couple of things I'll mention about these quick panels. These are the panels that you get when you double click on a value double click on a unit process in your GPSX layout. And now I'm sure you're used to using these on a regular basis. In fact, it is one of the most common ways to view the output of models in GPSX. Most people like to use this panel right here. You can see this is a column of all of these particular concentrations and whatnot for each of the connection points up here. I will mention, though, that these outputs up here can also be changed by pulling down this little menu over here. So right now they're showing flow, but you could have TSS or ammonia or alkalinity or any other things that you want to see up here. So sometimes that's handy to be able to see all of those things. We also have our unit specific information here. So since this is a clarifier, we're seeing things like surface loading rate and, sludge blanket height and wasted solids and so on. So that's available. But this little tool down here is also the mass flows. You'll notice this is not concentrations, but here units of mass per time. And so these are kind of big numbers here because I'm showing them in kilograms per day. But these are useful things also as well. Sometimes you may find that you want to just get a handle on, a particular flow of mass and through a particular point in your layout. Okay, one thing I will mention, since it does come up occasionally, one of the challenges that we have with these kinds of models, and I guess it's just due to the inherent nature of the work that we do and the inherent nature of wastewater treatment, is that the concentrations are often shown over quite several orders of magnitude, right? We have 0.01 milligrams per liter of phosphorus if you get down really low. At the same time, you have a number like 4,000 of your mixed liquor. So one thing that we do is allow you to manage the number of significant digits in your displays. And this can be, we've done our best to sort of anticipate how you would like to be able to see these numbers. But if you want to see more precision, if you want to have more significant digits, just come into that menu, change this number here from 4 up to some other higher number, and then you'll see more digits in your layout here. So right now we're seeing 4, so we're showing 4 across all these different orders of magnitude. Okay, so let me go back. I want to talk a little bit more about the actual quick panel itself and its functionality. So if I double click right here, it's going to bring up that one. This is the same one that I was just showing you right now. So if I drag that down, we can see these concentrations here. For example, the effluent TSS is 6.9 and so on. Now, this little panel right here is actually, a fairly nice, concise thing that we put together. You can change the units here if you like. Right now, I've got all of mine set to the SI units, but I can always just click on meters cubed per day here and pull it down and put it in MLD or MGD or whatever it is that I would like to do. That's fairly straightforward. That works basically just like the same functionality of any of our menus. But the one really fascinatingly handy thing is actually being able to copy this entire table just like this, and then I can either copy one row or I can copy the complete table to the clipboard. Now this is handy. I use this all the time. And basically if I go to a spreadsheet, so here I got this blank spreadsheet, I can actually just paste that thing that I copied. Boom, just like that. It's actually immensely easy to get data in and out of GPSX. If I just want to get like just a quick and dirty, just one column of numbers or something like that, it's really handy to be able to do that. That's a really nice feature that I use all the time. Okay, so now let's take a look at maybe something other than the quick panel. We're going to go over to our DO control. here, this was a layout that I borrowed from one of our sample layouts where part of the point of this layout was to talk about this DO controller adjusting the airflow while it's trying to keep the dissolved oxygen pretty close to this set point and so on. So say this is an important graph that you would like to have and put into a report or what have you. Again, one of the key things you might not know about them is you can you can generate reports to get all the stuff that you need, but in even faster ways, just right click, copy image to clipboard. So, oops, I did that a little quickly. Copy the image to clipboard from right clicking in the middle of the graph. So I'm going to do that. And then, you got a Word document, you can just paste that right in like that. And then you can comment on it below. It's nice and easy. And you can do the same thing for the data, just like on that other table, copy data to clipboard and put that in here. So let's say I'm just going to make another sheet here and we're going to paste. Now, this is all of the data from that whole long simulation. And so, and whatever the values that are showing in the graph, you'll get the data for them here. Super fast, nice and easy to play with and make small adjustments if you want to. If you want to get some more nicely formatted things, then you can generate a report to do that too. Right. Okay. So I should mention a couple of other features here that you may or may not know about. One is that you can change the axis units here just by right-clicking on days and go to hours if you prefer. It's sort of not obvious that that's something you can do, but you can. And also, if you want to change these units over here, you actually have to right-click and go to the output properties menu. And that's where you would change the units in this particular menu here, just by these drop downs as well. It's actually the same as hitting this gear button up here. Right. Okay, so now I have a couple of other features that I want to show you with respect to plotting bar graphs and digital graphs. So I'm going to switch to the steady state scenario that I had prepared previously. I had actually saved the stop time as 0 now. Previously it was 1 as part of this scenario. So when I run a simulation, it just stops. Just a steady state and stops there. So that's nice and handy. And I want to take a look at this bar graph here. Now you're probably used to seeing bar graphs a lot. We plot them a lot in these plug flow tanks. It's really handy for doing work in the BNR world, since you can look at lots of concentrations for various things like oxygen and ammonia, nitrate, and so on. So if we take a look at this nitrate graph, you may notice, if I blow this up here, that there's kind of a shadow that is being projected onto these bars. And that is data that I'm actually reading from a file. So that is a very handy thing. If I actually go back here to that menu again and we take a look at the data files, in addition to that dynamic data, I actually am reading in some stuff for this demo here. And in there, if I just open it up, is values for these bars. So think of this as being the same thing as plotting a bunch of data points on a graph, and then plotting like a time series graph, and then plotting a number of data point plotting the model results along with those data points over time. That's the same thing here. These are data values that I have entered. I'm doing the same thing here, but I'm doing it in a bar graph. So the shadow is the value that's being read from a file, and the solid lines are the ones that are being generated from the model. And it's really handy. Say, for example, if I was working on a calibration, I make a change to one of these parameters here. It's kind of like you might want to have your ultimate values that you're trying to match to as the shadows, and then I can play around with the parameters to try and get them to be reasonably close. And anyway, that's a feature that I don't think a lot of people know about. So thought I'd mention here that you can have targets to shoot for by reading them in from a file, just the same as you would as if it was a time series graph. Right. Okay. And again, I'm now looking at this kind of graph, which is a digital table. That's ones that you can drag things from the menus. Note here, again, that same concept. Data that I'm reading from a file, plotted alongside the values that come from the model. So it's useful if I want to have something that I just want to have a memory here of what it is that I'm thinking the target should be. And this is the data that's being calculated from the model. And then those things are plotted side by side. So again, this values will show up here by reading them from a file. And in fact, they are in this same file that I had. Here's the SRT one, 8 days, and the mixed liquor of 3,500. Okay, now let me go back to my slides for one last thing I wanted to say about statistical analysis. Now, this is a feature that's existed in GPSX for some time, and I know some people are quite fond of it, but I think it's something that maybe not everybody knows about because it's a very obscure way to get to the menu for it. So any place that you're plotting this, where you've got a solid line that is the model and a bunch of data points that you're reading from a file, you can right click on that graph and select statistics. And what it does is it produces some analysis for you about the goodness of fit of your model. And it actually produces a huge number of different possibilities of things that you can do. These are all the different kinds of graphs that you can do, including plotting a table of statistics here. I'm just going to focus on showing you the plot of the simulated versus measured, because I find myself this is the most useful one. So if you open that menu, hit that, I want to plot that particular graph. When you close the menu, it'll automatically generate this thing. And this is basically the measured value versus the model prediction at the same point in time. So theoretically, if you had a perfect model and it hit every data point, you would have all of your data falling on this 45-degree angle line. But since we don't, there's always noise and other imperfections in our models and their representation of reality. You'll find that there's something like this. Now, this was not a too terribly bad fit. It's not great, but it's not too bad. But it does show you that there's periods of time when it actually is very close, like this data point is almost exactly perfect. But you can take a look at this, and in fact, you can plot the residuals in many different ways and get a bunch of statistical measures to tell you how good your fit is. Now, I will mention that we did an entire webinar on this at the time that we added this feature to GPSX. This was many years ago, as a matter of fact. And so those goodness of fit webinar is available for you if you go to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Hydromantis. Now, I will say, this is from many years ago, so it's actually you'll see an older version of GPSX being used in this video. However, the functionality is pretty much the same. And when I went and looked at this when the preparation for this webinar, I'm like, yeah, we got to redo this webinar. So I put it on my list for the future. Okay, so I just very quickly want to show you what that looks like. So I'll go back here for our last demo of the day, and I'm going to go to demo number 3. And I'm going to go to the scenario number 3 here, because that's the one where all the data is being read in and the model's been calibrated a bit. You may, if you've looked around in our sample layouts, recognize this as being a slightly modified one of our sample layouts about using this particular feature. So nonetheless, here I'm showing this effluent COD graph. So this is one where there's data and model results. And once that is the case, if you right click, this statistics menu will come to life. And then I can open up the menu and select things that I want to have shown. So you can see here right off the bat that plot of simulated versus measured over here. And again, I'll also mention that you can copy all the data in the images to clipboard and do that thing that I was showing you earlier. But I can add other things as well. Let's do the histogram of standardized residuals. You can plot the residuals versus time. You can plot them versus the measured values. Lots of information there. So when you close the menu, here's another graph. Let me just auto arrange that. This is now a histogram showing how they fall on either side of this line. So if you had a lot of them that were above and not many below, then you would find that graph would be a lot more on the bars to the left than the right. And so it's a nice way to sort of analyze that. I've already shown the statistical one, but I've actually in this demo moved that output over here, but you can see a lot of that detail. So lots and lots going on there for those calculations. So I do like having that the measured versus the model predicted one. That I find to be very helpful while I'm doing model calibrations, and then you can actually do some stats on it to find out whether it's good enough. Okay, last thing that I will mention before we wind things up is what I would call our support materials. So in the GPSX the help menu, you can find lots of information about what's going on. So we have several different manuals. We have the user's guide. That's more about how to use the software. So that's like how to change the color on the graphs, how to build the different kinds of outputs that we have, and how to build a scenario and all of those things. So all the features of the software are in the user's guide. All the wastewater stuff is in the technical reference. So if you click on these are PDF documents, which will get open in a PDF viewer. I have to say the GPSX technical reference menu has grown a lot over the years as we've added more and more objects to GPSX and expanded to new libraries and expanded the objects within those libraries. And so now it is a giant beast of a PDF, it's I think 560 or 80 pages. So it's a little bit of a beast to try and navigate your way around. However, it is very comprehensive and you can search through it to find what you need. However, I also recommend going back to the help menu and go to the online help documentation section. That takes you, it opens your browser and it takes you to the part of our website where we provide a lot of the online help. And you'll notice right here, we have online versions of those same manuals. These, I think, are slightly easier to work with. They have, sort of nice looking formatting and so on. And the indexing, I think, is a little easier to work with. Either way works. You can do whatever, works for you. But I just thought I'd let you know that that's an option there. A couple other things that would be helpful here. We have some FAQs. Most of this is related to managing your licenses of GPSX. So what happens when I need to transfer a license to a new computer, or if I need some other information about doing things. That FAQ page would be there. There's links here to our YouTube channel and various other videos that we've created, like the tutorial videos, for example, and then some details about our ticketing system. So as you may recall, if you've been to some of our other past webinars recently, we instituted a tech support ticketing system last summer, and we've kind of refined a few things. That's working very well now. So when you send us a ticket, or you can come into this website and log a ticket of your own, then it is distributed to one of our staff, and then we have a record of all of the information that has been accessed and so on going forward, and that makes sure that no particular ticket gets left behind unanswered. You will note that our support at hydromantis.com is actually also still a valid way to ask a question. So if you want to just do it by email the regular way, you can also do that too. What will happen is we'll set it up in the ticketing system for you and respond back over there. That's kind of our preferred way of doing it. So I will note, as it mentions right here, if you're going to send us a copy of your model, please use the file archive command inside GPSX. It creates a zip file. That is what you need to send to us for us to be able to see your model in its full form. Right. Okay. So winding things up here, basically there is a multitude of small unique features in GPSX that can make things easier for managing your input, running your simulations, and producing the kind of input that will be most useful for you and the easiest way to communicate it to other people who need to see your results. So when I say a multitude of small features, it is many of these things are available by right-clicking on a menu or a graph or some spot on the drawing board. And so sometimes they're not maybe as obvious. So hopefully you've learned some new things today. And that in that View Preferences menu, there is other features and settings and things that you can use there to sort of tailor your user interface experience, and be able to understand to make it work the way that you want it to work. And lastly, there's lots of support options available, as I was showing before, by looking at the reference documents and so on, by going to our YouTube channel and looking at past webinars, and also all of our tutorial webinars are there as well.